The slow crunch of gravel under Dwayne Robbins' boots sent a strange chill down his spine. The air was thick, heavy with an eerie silence that felt unnatural. It had been years since he last walked this path, the driveway leading to his childhood home, the one place he thought he'd always have. Yet something was wrong. The towering pines that once stood proudly now loomed like silent sentinels, their branches casting unsettling shadows in the dim light. The house itself, a sanctuary of memories, felt different, darker. It was as if it, too, sensed something was coming. Then he saw it. A single, pristine white envelope stuck to the door, fluttering slightly in the breeze. HOA letterhead. His stomach tightened, a sharp spike of anxiety curling in his gut. The feeling wasn't just unease, it was dread, a warning, a threat, a storm waiting to break. He had only been back for a week, yet trouble was already waiting for him. Before we get into the full depth of this HOA nightmare, I need to ask you for one small favor. Deleted. Here's how you can help. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from, but most importantly, watch this video all the way to the end. The longer you watch, the more YouTube pushes it out to others who need to see it. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. This battle isn't just about Dwayne. It's about every homeowner who has ever been intimidated, threatened, or stripped of their rights by an oppressive HOA. Together we can stand against these abuses of power and bring them into the light. Stick with me. Let's fight back and expose the truth once and for all. Scout, stay, he murmured to his German shepherd. The dog, ever loyal, sat obediently but watched him closely, ears perked, sensing the tension in his master's voice. His golden brown eyes flickered between Dwayne and the envelope, as if he too knew that whatever was inside would change everything. Dwayne took a deep breath, his fingers trembling slightly as he reached for the envelope stuck to the door. It was crisp, unblemished, and carried an official weight that made his stomach churn before he even read the words inside. The seal bore the unmistakable emblem of the HOA, a symbol that had haunted countless homeowners before him. His heart pounded in his chest, a dull thud that echoed in his ears as he tore it open, his eyes scanning the bold, unfeeling letters that might as well have been carved in stone. Notice of violation, unapproved exterior paint color, overgrown lawn driveway cracks, unauthorized fence, miscellaneous infractions, fine due, $1,800. Failure to comply within 7 days may result in further legal action, including property reassessment and potential foreclosure. A surge of disbelief and rage coursed through him, making his hands grip the paper so tightly it crinkled beneath his fingers. This had to be a mistake. His house wasn't part of the HOA's jurisdiction. He had checked before buying it. Yet here it was, this piece of paper threatening everything he had worked for. The words blurred slightly as his vision darkened with fury. His fists curled involuntarily as he read the signature at the bottom of the letter. Karen Fitzdares, HOA president. Of course. The name alone sent a wave of frustration through him. He had heard of Karen Fitzdares, everyone had. She was notorious in the community for her ruthless enforcement of HOA policies, wielding her authority like a weapon. There had been whispers of her stretching the rules, making life miserable for homeowners who didn't conform to her impossible standards. Dwayne stormed inside, the letter gripped so tightly in his hand that his knuckles turned white. He tossed it onto the kitchen table, running a hand through his short-cropped hair. His pulse was still racing, his mind flashing through all the nights he had spent overseas, facing real danger, real threats. But this was different. This was home, and he wasn't about to let some power-hungry bureaucrat strip him of it. The next morning, Dwayne walked straight to his mailbox, already bracing himself for what he might find. Sure enough, another pristine envelope sat inside, its presence an unwelcome and infuriating reminder that the battle had already begun. This time his jaw clenched so tight it hurt. He ripped it open, scanning the words that seemed to taunt him. Final warning. Property in non-compliance. Immediate action required. His vision blurred with fury, his breath coming in short, controlled bursts as he fought the urge to crumple the paper into a ball and toss it into the wind. He wasn't going to play this game. Not with her. Determined, He turned on his heel, stormed back inside, and grabbed his phone. His fingers hovered over the numbers for a moment before he punched in the digits from the letter, pressing the phone to his ear with barely contained frustration. 2 rings, then a voice he already despised. "Hello, this is Karen Fitzdares, president of the HOA. How may I help you?" Her tone was sweet, artificially so, but beneath it was something else, something cold and calculating, the kind of voice that masked a sharp, serrated edge. "This is Dwayne Robbins," he said, his voice taut with restraint. "I just got a letter saying I have fines to pay, but as far as I know, my house isn't part of the HOA. There was a pause, then a syrupy, condescending laugh. "Oh, Mr. Robbins, yes, I was expecting your call. You see, while you were away, the board approved an expansion of our jurisdiction. Your home is now included." Dwayne's grip on the phone tightened. "That's not legal. I never signed anything." "Oh, but the community did," she said smoothly, her words laced with smug satisfaction. "And as a homeowner here, you must abide by the new rules." His breath came slow and measured, his patience a fragile thread threatening to snap. "I'm not paying you a dime." Karen sighed dramatically. "Oh, Mr. Robbins, I do hope you reconsider. It would be such a shame if this escalated." A slow, creeping chill crawled up Dwayne's spine. This wasn't just about rules. This woman wasn't simply enforcing policies. She was orchestrating something much bigger, and he had a sinking feeling he was the target. As he hung up, Scout let out a low growl, his deep brown eyes fixed on the window. Dwayne followed his gaze, and his stomach dropped. A white car idled at the end of his driveway, watching, waiting. The next few weeks became a living nightmare. Dwayne noticed unfamiliar vehicles parked outside at odd hours, lingering just long enough to make their presence known. The cameras he installed caught figures skulking around his property late at night, their faces obscured by hoods, their movements deliberate and suspicious. His mailbox overflowed with notices, each one more aggressive than the last, each one carrying the same signature, the same unrelenting threat. Then came the worst blow. A notice arrived, its words colder than ice. "Due to continued non-compliance, the HOA has begun proceedings to place a lien on your property. If the fines are not resolved immediately, your home will be forcibly put up for sale." The world around him blurred in a haze of red-hot anger. His grip on the letter tightened, his pulse a deafening roar in his ears. Dwayne saw red. This wasn't just harassment, this was war. And Karen Fitzdares had just made the biggest mistake of her life. He wasn't going down without a fight. He didn't hesitate. Dwayne Carter had spent his life fighting battles, but he never thought one of the toughest would be against the very people who were supposed to protect his neighborhood. His grip tightened around his phone as he dialed a number he hadn't used in years. Frank Hargrove, a seasoned attorney with a reputation for dismantling corrupt HOA regimes, answered after 2 rings. "This isn't just about fines, Dwayne," Frank said gravely. His voice was steady, but there was an edge of concern to it. "They're strong-arming you. They've done this before." Dwayne felt his pulse pounding in his ears. He had suspected this was bigger than just a few fines, but hearing it confirmed sent a wave of fury crashing through him. His jaw tightened. "Not this time." His voice was low, steady, filled with a resolve that had seen him through far worse battles. That night he took action. He didn't just set up a couple of cameras. He fortified his home like he was preparing for war. Every angle was covered, from the driveway to the backyard, every blind spot illuminated. Scout, his fiercely loyal German shepherd, paced restlessly beside him, as if sensing the tension thickening in the air. He checked the locks twice, then 3 times. Every muscle in his body wound tight with anticipation. The air in his home felt different, charged, as if something big was coming, and he was ready for it. And then, the proof came. The footage was more damning than he had even hoped for. Karen McNeil, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, was caught in the dead of night, creeping around his property. She wasn't just observing, she was documenting, snapping photos of his home, scribbling notes on a clipboard like a detective gathering evidence for a case she had already decided the outcome of. She was building a case against him. Dwayne's stomach twisted in disgust, but he didn't waver. He doubled down. He started collecting everything, every letter, every aggressive notice, every ridiculous fine. He recorded every interaction with Karen and her minions. He even went door to door, speaking to his neighbors, learning that he wasn't the only one who had been targeted. Some had lost their homes. Others had caved to Karen's bullying and paid exorbitant fines just to be left alone. Some had even been forced into selling under dubious circumstances, their dreams shattered by Karen's insatiable thirst for power. The more he uncovered, the clearer it became. Karen wasn't just enforcing rules. She was running a racket, using the HOA as a weapon to strip homeowners of their rights and seize control of their properties. And he wasn't going to be her next victim. Then the moment of reckoning came. One night, deep into the early morning hours, Scout's sudden guttural barking jolted Dwayne awake. Adrenaline surged through his veins as he grabbed his phone and checked the camera feed. His breath caught. Karen and two others, measuring tape in hand, sneaking around the edges of his property line like thieves in the night. Their hushed voices carried through the stillness, discussing repossessing the land for community improvements. It was more than just an overreach. This was theft in the making. His blood boiled. Enough was enough. By the time the sun rose, Dwayne and Frank had filed a lawsuit. It wasn't just for harassment. It was for trespassing, fraud, and the illegal seizure of property rights. Frank worked swiftly, gathering statements and compiling evidence. The moment Karen was served with the lawsuit, the cracks in her empire began to show. But Karen didn't back down easily. The next few weeks were a battle of attrition. Karen and the HOA fought back with everything they had. More fines arrived, threatening letters, even a fabricated complaint that Dwayne's home was a public nuisance. They even attempted to tarnish his reputation with the local community, spreading rumors that he was dangerous, unstable, and a threat to neighborhood harmony. But he stood his ground, each attempt only adding more evidence to the case against her. The trial was brutal. Dwayne sat in the courtroom, his fists clenched beneath the table as Frank eviscerated the HOA's case. He laid out a damning trail of evidence, surveillance footage, records of fabricated violations, and threatening letters masked as official notices. Karen's defense attorney, a slick-suited man named Richard Dalton, rose to counter, his voice smooth and practiced. "Your Honor, my client was merely fulfilling her duties as HOA president. Her actions were entirely within her legal rights as dictated by the association's bylaws." He gestured towards Karen, who sat stone-faced, her hands folded neatly on the table as if she were the victim in all of this. Frank scoffed, shaking his head as he pressed a button on his laptop, playing the footage of Karen sneaking onto Dwayne's property in the dead of night. The courtroom fell silent except for the grainy sounds of rustling leaves and hushed whispers. "Does this look like a legal inspection to you?" Frank asked coldly. "Because to me, it looks like trespassing with intent to intimidate." Karen shifted in her seat, her jaw tightening as a murmur rippled through the audience. Dalton adjusted his tie, clearing his throat. "This footage proves nothing. Perhaps my client was merely ensuring community standards were being met." Frank arched a brow. "At 2 a.m, with a flashlight and measuring tape?" Dalton had no reply. The silence was deafening. Then came the testimonies. Neighbor after neighbor took the stand, their voices shaking, their hands clutching the edges of the podium as they relived the nightmare Karen had inflicted upon them. Elderly homeowners spoke of how they were hounded with escalating fines and pushed into desperation as their savings drained away. A young couple, their dreams of raising a family shattered, recalled the gut-wrenching moment they received an eviction notice over an arbitrary rule violation. One man, his face lined with grief, recounted how his sick wife spent her final days in a constant state of anxiety, terrified that they would lose their home. Some witnesses couldn't hold back their tears, sobbing as they described the fear and helplessness they had felt under Karen's iron grip. Others spoke with unfiltered rage, fists clenched, voices rising as they recounted how Karen had manipulated legal loopholes, twisting regulations until they were forced to sell everything they had built. Their words cut through the courtroom, raw and painful, a chorus of broken lives left in the wake of Karen's relentless pursuit of control. Karen's once confident demeanor began to crumble. She squirmed in her seat, her face paling as the walls closed in around her. She stammered through weak explanations, her carefully crafted persona unraveling with every piece of damning evidence presented against her. The weight of years of corruption bore down on her, and for the first time, she had nowhere to hide. The judge's verdict was swift and devastating. The HOA was found guilty of fraudulent practices, illegal expansion, and targeted harassment. Karen was stripped of her position, her power yanked away in an instant. And Dwayne? He was awarded damages that made up for every sleepless night, every unjust fine, every ounce of stress she had put him through. But beyond that, he won something even more important: justice. A victory not just for himself, but for every homeowner who had ever suffered under the iron grip of an unchecked HOA. But the best part came later. With Karen gone, the HOA collapsed under the weight of its own corruption. A new board was elected, one that vowed to undo the damage she had done. The oppressive fines disappeared. The illegal expansions were reversed. Homeowners who had been driven out were invited back. The neighborhood began to heal. The weight that had sat on the shoulders of so many was lifted. As they exited the courtroom, Karen's eyes burned with fury, her entire body rigid with barely restrained rage. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, nails digging into her palms as she turned on Dwayne with a sudden, almost predatory movement. Her voice came out in a venomous hiss, trembling with fury. "This isn't over!" Her nostrils flared, and her narrowed eyes gleamed with something dangerous, a promise of vengeance yet to come. Dwayne didn't flinch. Instead, he let the corner of his mouth curl into a slow, deliberate smirk, his stance casual but unshakable. "Oh, it definitely is," he said, his voice steady, his words slicing through the tension like a blade. The battle was over. His home was his again, and no one, not Karen, not the HOA, not anyone, would ever take that from him again. In the days that followed, Dwayne walked through his neighborhood, now free from Karen's reign. Neighbors greeted him warmly, thanking him for standing up to the tyranny that had plagued them for so long. He had fought not just for himself, but for them, and they knew it. Scout trotted happily beside him as he looked out at his home, the place he had fought so hard to keep. And with a deep breath, he finally allowed himself to feel what had been stolen from him for so long: peace. What would you do if your home, the place you built your life around, was suddenly under attack by an overreaching HOA? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters in exposing these outrageous injustices.